Imagine a world where the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, where people were denied the right to choose their own leaders, and where a powerful church controlled not just the spiritual lives of its followers, but also their material well-being. This was the world of 14th century England, a time of great turmoil and change. One of the most shocking aspects of this period was the way in which ordinary people, tired of being oppressed, began to stand up against the powerful lords and the church. This essay will explore the story of Robin Hood and the rise of John Wyclif, two figures who played crucial roles in shaping the social and religious landscape of medieval England. In the 14th century, England was a country where the gap between the rich and the poor was vast. The nobles and the church owned most of the land, while the common people struggled to survive. The Black Death, a devastating plague that swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, had killed a significant portion of the population, leaving behind a labor shortage. This shortage gave workers more bargaining power, and they began to demand higher wages and better working conditions. However, the wealthy landowners and merchants were not happy with this new dynamic, and complained bitterly about the wicked and seditious behavior of the laborers. One of the most famous legends that emerged during this time was that of Robin Hood. Robin Hood was a folk hero who, according to legend, robbed the rich to give to the poor. He and his band of outlaws lived in the forests, defying the authority of the nobles and the church. While the wealthy accused Robin and his followers of being criminals, the common people saw them as champions of justice. Robin Hood's legend became a symbol of resistance against the oppressive system. The story of Robin Hood reflects the social tensions of the time. The laborers and servants, who were often mistreated by their masters, began to leave their jobs and form small groups that lived outside the traditional societal structure. These groups, like Robin Hood's band, often resorted to robbery to survive. The nobles and the church saw this as a threat to their power and tried to suppress these movements. However, the more they tried to control the laborers, the more determined the laborers became to fight back. While Robin Hood's legend was a form of social protest, the religious unrest of the time was led by a different kind of figure, John Wyclif, an Oxford theologian and preacher. Wyclif was a man who dared to challenge the authority of the church and the monarchy. He criticized the church for its materialism and worldliness, and he argued that the church should not hold temporal power. Wyclif believed that the church's wealth and influence were obstacles to people's direct relationship with God. Wyclif's ideas were radical for his time. He proposed that the church should be disendowed of its temporal property, meaning that the land and wealth it owned should be taken away and given back to the people. He also argued that the clergy should not have the power to govern, and that all authority should belong to the civil powers. Wyclif's critique of the church was not just about its wealth. He also challenged the church's doctrines and practices. He believed that the priesthood was not necessary for salvation, and that the Bible should be translated into the vernacular so that ordinary people could read and understand it. Wyclif's ideas gained popularity among the common people and the lower clergy, who were disillusioned with the church. A movement called Lollardy emerged, which spread Wyclif's teachings and challenged the church's authority. The Lollards, as they were called, were often seen as heretics by the church, but they continued to spread their message of reform and religious freedom. The Lollards movement was not just a religious one, it also had political implications. Many knights and nobles, who resented the church's hold on political power, supported the Lollards. The Earl of Salisbury, for example, removed all statues of saints from his chapel, and was known as a derider of images. The movement also gained the support of John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, who saw Wyclif's ideas as a way to challenge the church's control over land and wealth. The alliance between Wyclif and John of Gaunt was a significant factor in the political landscape of the time. John of Gaunt, who was the son of King Edward III and the brother of the Black Prince, had his own ambitions. He wanted to end the war with France and focus on gaining the throne of Castile, which he believed was his by right of marriage. To achieve this, he needed to challenge the power of the church and the influence of the clergy in the government. Wyclif's ideas provided a doctrinal basis for this challenge. In 1376, the political tensions in England came to a head when Parliament met at Westminster. The Commons, which represented the common people, decided to take a stand against the corruption and mismanagement of the government. For the first time in history, the Commons elected a speaker, Sir Peter de la Mare, who brought charges against several of the king's ministers. The Commons accused these ministers of amassing immense fortunes through fraud and deceit, and of wasting the nation's resources on the war with France. The king's councillors were powerful figures, including Lord Latimer, the Chamberlain, and Sir Richard Lyons, a rich merchant who acted as the king's chief agent with the commercial community. Alice Purrs, the king's mistress, was also accused of embezzling large sums of money from the royal coffers. The Commons argued that the king should maintain the war out of his own resources, and that the people were too poor and feeble to endure further taxation. The Parliament of 1376, known as the Good Parliament, was a turning point in English history. It marked the first time that the Commons had taken a significant role in the governance of the country. The Commons' actions were a clear challenge to the power of the nobles and the church, and they set the stage for further reforms in the years to come. However, the success of the Good Parliament was short-lived. The Duke of Lancaster, who was the real head of the government, managed to regain control. He had the leaders of the Commons arrested, and the Parliament dissolved. Nevertheless, the seeds of change had been planted, and the ideas of reform and religious freedom continued to spread. The 14th century was a time of great change and upheaval in England. The legend of Robin Hood and the teachings of John Wyclif were just two of the many factors that contributed to the social and religious transformations of the period. Robin Hood's legend inspired the common people to resist oppression, while Wyclif's ideas challenged the authority of the church and the monarchy. These movements laid the groundwork for the Reformation and the eventual rise of a more democratic and secular society. In the end, the story of Robin Hood and John Wyclif is a story of ordinary people standing up against a powerful and oppressive system. It is a story of courage, perseverance, and the unquenchable desire for justice and freedom. These figures, though they lived centuries ago, continue to inspire people today, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for change.